Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As founder of CASA, I, Lieutenant General Gautam Murthy, welcome you all to the 26th CASA webinar on who's keeping the pot boiling in J&K and options for India. The targeted killing of Hindus, around 10 of them in Kashmir in the valley over the past couple of months, has reverberated across the country, triggering both fear and anger and threatening to put paid to the government's efforts to establish normalcy. The killings have generated fears of another mass exodus, with the government using all means at its disposal to prevent Hindus from leaving the valley. Despite this, many Pandit families have moved out of the transit camps set up for them. All this has happened just as many felt that Kashmir had turned the corner. So what has triggered this fresh wave of egregious violence? Who's keeping the pot boiling in J&K, and what are the government's options? To speak on this, we have with us a very select panel. Allow me to introduce them. Our first panelist is Mr. Bashir Assad. Mr. Assad is a researcher, intellectual, author, and motivational speaker based in Srinagar. He has written extensively on the Kashmir dynamics and on radicalization. He is the author of K-File, The Conspiracy of Silence, one of his most popular books on the Kashmir issue. His second book is titled Kashmir Beyond Article 370, and the third book is titled Kashmir, The War of Narratives. His columns appear in international and national journals, magazines, and portals, as well as some of India's most reputed think tank publications. Mr. Assad has represented the nation at the Human Rights Council of the United Nations 4 times. He is also the editor-in-chief of Kashmir Central, a news magazine published from Kashmir, and editor-in-chief of Media Analysis Center Kashmir. The Media Analysis Center publishes 3 popular digital magazines by the name of K-Zine, Mac Letter, and K2. Mr. Assad propagates rational political narrative amongst the youth in Kashmir. He is actively involved in the cultural integration of Kashmir with the mainland through his NGO Leher Foundation. He is engaged in promotion and propagation of nationalistic narrative, both politically and intellectually, and is upfront in challenging the illegitimate and anti-national narrative sponsored by Pakistan, as also by the non-state actors. We welcome Mr. Bashir Assad to our webinar and request him to speak on the current situation. Our second speaker this evening is Mr. Javed Beg, who is a political leader. He is a former General Secretary of the People's Democratic Front Secular, and also a research scholar doing his research in Sufism and the Kashmir culture. He is a prolific writer and prominent debater. He promotes a modern, secular, progressive, liberal, and inclusive Kashmir. We welcome Mr. Beg to this webinar, and we request him to speak on how the state government should react to the present situation and what are its capabilities and deficiencies. Our third panelist this evening is Mr. K. Skandan, who had served the then undivided state of J&K as advisor to the governor and left soon after it became a union territory. Mr. Skandan has a master's degree in political science from Madras University and National Merit Scholarship holder. He joined the IAS in 1982. He served for 25 years in Tamil Nadu in senior positions before being deputed to MHA in Jan 2007 as Joint Secretary and continued there as Additional Secretary till Jan 2014. During much of his tenure in MHA, he looked after the J&K division. He retired from Tamil Nadu from the government service in December 2016 as Additional Chief Secretary before taking up the assignment as advisor to Governor. He resides in Chennai. We welcome Mr. Skandan and request him to speak on how the central government should be handling the situation. Our fourth speaker today is Dr. Tara Kartha, a CASA member, who is a distinguished fellow at the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies. She had earlier spent 17 years at the National Security Council Secretariat. At the NSCS, she worked on terrorism and other security issues relating to the neighborhood and had special charge of the NSAB2 amongst her other responsibilities. Earlier, she was with the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis for 8 years, where she authored a book, Tools of Terror, Light Weapons and India's Security. We welcome Dr. Tara Kartha and request her to speak on Pakistan's role in the current situation and what should India do about it. Our moderator for this discussion is none other than Lieutenant General Ata Hasnain, PVSM, UISM, AVSM, SM BSM Bar, who's arguably an authority when it comes to Jammu and Kashmir. His last assignment and services was as military secretary, but prior to that, he commanded the prestigious 15th Corps in Srinagar and has held a number of other command and staff and instructional appointments, as well as served in a UN mission abroad. I may add that he also commanded the Uri Brigade as well as the Baramulla Division. In 2018, General Hasnain was appointed as Chancellor of the Central University of J&K. On February 2020, he was appointed member of the NDMA in the status of Secretary to the Government of India. In that appointment, he is currently also a member of the Empowered Committee for Information and Communication set up by the PMO. As all are aware, he also finds time to write commentaries on geopolitics and speak extensively too. I welcome you, sir, to this webinar and thank you for accepting our request to be the moderator of this very important discussion. So without further ado, it is over to you, sir, for the conduct of this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, young Gautam. Jai Hind to everyone. Welcome to all members of CASA, our panel here, everyone else who's networked with us today to discuss this very, very important ongoing subject, current subject at the moment. The time now is 5:10, almost 5:10. It's 9 minutes past 5. We have precisely an hour and 20 minutes, which means 80 minutes available to us to discuss this. We have 4 panelists who will speak for approximately 10 minutes each to allow ourselves a good 35 to 40 minutes for the Q&A session. I shall speak only and introduce only very, very briefly in the next 2-3 minutes. I was in Kashmir on 19th of March, the year 2000, when 36 Sikhs were gunned down at the village of Chittisinghpura. And that was one of the most heinous minority killings which took place in the valley. It was with an intent to send home a message that the Lashkar-e-Toiba had arrived in South Kashmir. That was the system which the LET used to always follow in areas they started dominating. They used to carry out a minority atrocity and announce it to the world, like they did at Vandhama, that they did at Nandi Marg and places like that. But almost now 20 years later, 22 years later, we are finding a repetition of this taking place. I always perceived that the one area in which my hands as a corps commander was always tied was the issue of minority killings or atrocities or targeted killings, as you would say. Because this is, in comparison to big ticket acts like Pulwama or Uri and things like that, this is the most nondescript way of fighting a proxy war. Yet, today we are realizing how effective it is, how it has managed to get to us in a very, very negative way, and we are not being able to clearly discern the methodology we need to adopt for neutralizing the conflict transformation which is underway at the moment. This happened to us in 2008 also, when all of a sudden you found terrorists in the background and lots and lots of members of the youth appearing in front with stone throwing demonstrations going on all over the streets. The separatists used to give out those calls for the Chalo programs to different parts of Jammu and Kashmir, and suddenly you found the space which we were controlling, handling, dominating, suddenly disappearing. And the separatists getting the better of us in many ways. Today, we are almost at such a juncture where you find that simply using the AK-47 in a spray mode is not going to deliver any results to us. So there have to be different ways found to ensure how we overcome, how we neutralize this particular threat which is emerging. Who is behind it? What are our vulnerabilities? What can we do about it? Just remember one thing, that as far as Pakistan is concerned, for them, everything is going. They are continuing with the ceasefire. Their economy being in doldrums at the moment, no one is really pointing fingers at them. The FATF is after them, so everyone is saying that their hands are off. They are in denial mode completely. Their relationship they are seeking with the United States, they've already got with China, tends to bring about a projection from their side that they would not like to be seen meddling anywhere. So who is behind this? Is this an independent action taking place on the part of political Islam, the members of political Islam, or terrorists by themselves. We have very, very good people to answer that. One or two pointers which I just like to point out. One, a lot of people are comparing, there's a lot of people who speak to me are comparing this with Punjab and saying that in Punjab, the methodology which the Punjab police followed, which Mr. KPS Gill followed, led to the eventual resolution of the issues there. Is that the answer here? That's something which I would like to ask our expert. Is that the answer here? Is the Punjab model the answer to Jammu and Kashmir's current problem of minority targeting? Is counter-violence the only answer? A lot of people talk about outreach to the people. Are we well empowered? Are we capable? Are we intellectually well endowed enough to be able to reach out to the people? Do we understand their culture, their faith, their problems, to be able to sit with them and discuss this on an equal level? And lastly, does this have a linkage with many other factors related to political Islam, which is at the moment reasonably well undercover around the world? You're not finding too much of it with the Ukraine conflict and what's happening in the Indo-Pacific, etc. You're finding the issues of global terror, etc., all have receded in the background. So with this kind of a situation, is advantage being taken of it today? We don't know. My 5 minutes are over. I think this is the time. We are waiting to listen to our eminent panelists. And the first of them, Mr. Bashir Asad, already very well introduced, a good friend of mine. Looking forward to hearing your views. I would request every panelist to be pointed, focused, no need for a backdrop at all. Everyone is aware of it here. You're looking at two issues. Who is keeping the pot boiling in Jammu and Kashmir, and what are the options for India? Over to you, Mr. Bashir Asad. 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Kasa. Thank you, Tara, for reaching me out at the time when I was just emerging out of a problem. I had a cardiac arrest. Anyway, sir, I would like to be, as usual, I would like to be very, very, very brief and precise about the things. The issue in hand is that the violence, the level of violence in Kashmir region is going high. It is going up. Particularly, the targets are minorities, members of minority community, whether residents or non-residents, and of course those who don't subscribe to the views of the terrorists. So you made a very valid point. I have been all along saying that you only need some triggering points in Kashmir. The problem is there, and there's a triggering point, and it will simmer. That is precisely what is happening in Kashmir. I have been actually cautioning and warning the government, the UT administration, since November 2021, that the adversaries, the Pakistan, is up to something huge in the coming summer. So you have to be extra vigilant. And you will be surprised, sir. I hope you will be reading the magazine regularly. I made it a point to discuss this issue in many editions of the magazine, that we are going to face some huge security challenges in the coming summer in 2022 because of 2 or 3 factors which I want to underline. One, that the already indoctrinated youth, which I think comprise a very sizable chunk of the population of Kashmir now, unfortunately, you just provide them some kind of fodder, you just give them some kind of trigger, and they will come out for the action. So the first important thing was that we, for many months, actually, let's be honest, sir, you belong to the security establishment. I hope you will appreciate and understand my point. For many months, we remained in denial mood that Pakistan is sending arms, particularly the light weapons, the pistols, and the narcotics through drones. They dropped it in Odi sector, they dropped it in Tangdar sector, they dropped it in Samba, they dropped it elsewhere in Naushahra sector. Huge ammunitions. And according to the UT level of security and intelligence people, you have around 1,300 pistols that have gone to the OGWs, or what we call the hybrid terrorists. The hybrid terrorists are actually posing the greater threat to the security, because they just go select a target and vanish away from the spot, from the scene, and take on their usual business. There are no designated terrorists involved in the killings which happened since January this year. So, not a single designated terrorist, not a single listed terrorist was identified by the Jammu and Kashmir police or the security agencies working there involved in any kind of attacks on the minority targets. It is all happening through hybrid terrorists. So, the triggering point was, let us be honest, we should not be actually trying to hide behind certain those political narratives and all that. The fact remains that the state administration and the Department of Home, the North Block, they, from time to time since August 5, 2019, they have been trying to give this impression to the people in Kashmir that, look, we are here to conquer you. They are actually providing some kind of space to what the adversaries are actually, now what the narrative of adversaries is, that the insecurities are bringing in, that demographic changes are on cards, etc. Why you are issuing orders after orders after orders which only cause suspicion among the people, which only gives rise to suspicions? Why are you making people doubt you as the administrator, as governance, as government? Why are you actually giving them this chance to doubt you, to have to cast a shadow, to cast aspersions? Why? So, the idea of abrogation was to integrate emotionally the people of Kashmir Valley, particularly with the mainland. You did whatever you wanted to do, fine. I absolutely stand by that decision, absolutely, because that was required. But what was the follow-up? As General Hasnan pointed, sir, let us be honest in admitting that we don't have a blueprint. This was number one, sir, which is actually triggering these kind of actions in Kashmir Valley. But we cannot justify such kind of killings. They are happening and they will happen in the future also. Only yesterday, in a conversation with LG, I requested him that we should be strategically and tactically intelligent. Your enemy is so he is 24/7 into playing the games with you. So we cannot wish away the enemy. We cannot wish away the Pakistan. We cannot wish away the terrorists who are operating in Kashmir, and that too the foreign terrorists who have come in large numbers after Talibanization of Afghanistan. So there are many problems, sir. And second important thing is, sir, in absence of a political narrative, the LG administration is doing a lot of things which are in the interest of the general people. But the problem here is there is none available who could propagate or who could put forth this narrative. So your political class in Kashmir, they have joined hands. They are actually, there is unanimity in their thought processes. They stand on one hand, and there is no one to challenge their political narrative, and there is no one to propagate the idea, or at least there is no one to give justification to the actions of the government whatsoever. There is none. This is part 2, sir. Part 3, sir, as Kashmiri, let me tell you, sir, there is so much of arrogance in the administration. There is so much. They are now, there is, they are answerable to none. They are accountable to none. The doors for the people are closed. So, when you have the indoctrinated minds, when you have Pakistan there, when you have Jamaat-e-Islami there, when you have Salafis there, when you have all such forces there, you have to be extra careful, extra vigilant, and you have to have a plan in hand to deal with such kind of situations. How you can deal militarily, as General Hasnan said, AK-47 is not the only answer to whatever is happening in Kashmir. You need to think beyond AK-47 also, sir. You need to have a reach out plan. And as far as my personal opinion is concerned, it is altogether different from the rest of Kashmiris. I'm not talking about taking on board the adversaries or the stooges of Pakistan or the militant leaders or all their overground workers. I'm not talking about that. So at least give some kind of window to the people. Reach them out, sir.
Sorry, Mr. Asad, can I give you 1 minute to wrap and we'll continue?
Yeah.
And the Q&A section. Sorry, go ahead, wrap up in a minute, please. Thank you.
So there are a host of issues, sir, which are actually disturbing, which are disturbing, sir. So you gave us the impression that there are two political parties which could actually help us in understanding the narrative of the state of New Delhi. And you know, sir, sometimes both of them, they actually cross the limits. They say what Mahbuba Mufti or Umarullah could not say. So the problem here is that in absence of a political narrative and the administrative failure in reaching out to the people and providing a people-friendly administration is actually the biggest problem, sir. So your deputy commissioners, your SSPs, district SSPs in Kashmir, let me tell you, sir, honestly, they have completely shut their doors for the people. And then we are expecting that now the situation will ease out by itself. Is it possible? So there are a number of problems in Kashmir, sir.
Thank you, Bashir. I think we will wrap up there because
yes,
time is really over. Thank you very much for your intervention. You've covered a lot of ground, although initially you went all over, but at the later part of it, you were very, very focused, and you brought out 2 or 3 very important issues: the arrogance of the administration, the lack of political narratives, alternative narratives being followed, the lack of a proper outreach in terms of the government servants not being able to do the necessary outreach to the people concerned. And I'm not sure whether you also meant that the political space is really not being utilized properly, which is available there, which is not being used properly, because there is really no political elements which are there to exploit this space.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. We will listen to Mr. Javed Beg, because I'm sure he'll substantiate something of yours, will add much more to it. This is the local voice coming out from the ground in Kashmir, and therefore it's very, very important on our part to listen to this. Over to you, Javed. 10 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Jai Hind. General Saab, thank you so much, and highly thankful to CASA platform bringing me in this August webinar, wherein I can see intellectuals audible.
Yeah, you have gone off. I don't know.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible, but you're high. Your picture's back. Okay, now go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, since this topic is my state, Jammu and Kashmir, so it's very close to me, and I have done some homework also before I entered this August intellectual brainstorming session. We are fighting a multi-dimensional war with not a single enemy, but many enemies. An enemy, outsider enemy, and enemies within. The things we have been discussing so far are very important, but we have always missed on a very important thing that I have been raising at many platforms through my write-ups, through my social media. And in fact, the book I am writing, I have in fact mentioned there also that Kashmir is a kind of what I call it, a place wherein anything happening around world is being pushed towards Kashmir, and the enemy is there. Enemy is known. I don't want to get into that. Enemy is absolutely, and of course, Pakistan. They have been trying to, whatever they did in the last 32 years, now they are trying to take it to next level. The war we are fighting is kinetic, psychological, and it's ideological, where I have always raised this thing. It's an ideology, and the ideology is known. It is the ideology of Deoband. This Deoband ideology, which has radicalized Kashmiris, which has taken Kashmiris to a psychological phase of conditioning. Until and unless we do not decondition and de-radicalize, a majority population in Kashmir will keep hating everything and anything which is Indian, especially non-Muslims, I mean Hindus, because the way people have been killed here, the soft targets, I mean the innocent civilians in the name of their faith. What pushed those young boys to kill an unarmed Kashmiri, Rahul Bhatt? There is something more into it. The level of hatred over the time inculcated in these young boys. It's not only these young boys, but in their families, their last 2 or 3 generations. Kashmiris have never been so radicalized. Kashmiris have never been so intolerant. Of late, I have myself been facing threat is okay. A sense of insecurity is also all right. But the ideology you belong to, the philosophy of life you adopt, the sect you belong to, I have been named and shamed on these bases. I am somebody who believes in the idea of India. And I always, whenever I get an opportunity, I try to make this idea of India, mainstream in our younger generation. But the feedback has been like, we trust you, we follow you, but anything which is kafir, this word, it is a borrowed word. My parent generation says that this word was never used here, not Gair Musalman word. Kashmiri Muslims have never used this word before 90s, Gair Musalman or kafir. But now people, you can see on social media, in spaces, Twitter spaces, people using this kafir, Gair Musalman. So this is the ideological narrative they've been pushing here for last 3 decades. Now they have taken it to next level. Now this is a generation which was born in last 30 years chaos. So this generation is more vulnerable to adopt that ideology. And this ideology is not limited to hating non-Muslims only. No, if that was the case, then things would have been different in Kabul. In Kabul, we don't have non-Muslims there. So when people in, the majority in Kabul celebrated so-called Azadi after the withdrawal of Washington, they thought things will change there, but nothing changed. In last 5-6 months, more than 3,000 innocent people of the same religion from different sects, following different philosophy of life, they were killed in mosques, in imambadas, in madrasas, in Sufi shrines. So my assessment of this whole and very important topic is, it is Pakistan who has been keeping this pot boiling in Kashmir, and it's not limited up to Pakistan only. Of late, we have seen Turkey and Malaysia getting into this global cabal against the idea of India. It is not limited to this territory only. This ideology we have seen in last 1 week, this ideology is against the holy and beautiful idea of India, which I have been telling intellectuals like General Saab, that this ideology is against that idea, and they have a place to create rucks, to create law and order, to create chaos, and that place is unfortunately Kashmir. Because in Kashmir, you have raw material, and that raw material is being prepared in institutions. They are being inculcated to hate anything and everything which is Hindu and Indian. That is the reason a progressive, well-educated girl from my district was killed, Amreen Bhatt. She was killed by her neighbors from the same caste, Bhatt caste. Why did they kill her? She was not a non-Muslim. For them, they use this word kafir. She was a Muslim. Because she was killed by that ideology. That ideology is extremely intolerant. That ideology takes refuge in the religion. And this ideology, I'm very sorry to say, this ideology is being run in the heartland of my country. This ideology is the driving force of Al-Qaeda and Taliban. This ideology is the driving force of...
Javed, you will have to start winding up now, because we've got 1 minute for more.
Yes, sir. I'll just finish. I have few points to make. This ideology is driving force of Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Toiba. And that ideology we can actually counter by identifying those sects or sections of our society who believe in the idea of India, who are more tolerant. We have a Gujjar community here that has not been given national or international platform to show that not every Kashmiri Muslim is intolerant, is highly radicalized. We have Shia sect here, and nobody from Shia sect, Gujjar, Pahadi, Bakarwal, or the lowest class of our society, I'm not talking about sect, but the caste, they have never been given platforms to showcase to the world, wherein Pakistan has been using international platforms to push their narrative, which is fake. We have to mainstream these sects, these castes, to push the narrative of the idea of India, which is being looked by whole world.
Thank you,
Javed.
so much, thank you very much. In your time, you have covered a lot of ground, and the main theme of your presentation has been, no doubt, about radicalism, the inability of the state to be able to find adequate counters to it. But I wish, and I hope you will do it later in the Q&A session if something comes up, as to how exactly are we to do this whole business of counter-radicalization. Is there enough being done on it? Or do you think there's much more to be done on it? What are the methodologies that we think internationally, what really is being done about this? This is a long-term problem, not a short-term problem. All of us realize it. How can we make it effective in the short term too? This should be one of the challenges for all of us. Now I shift over to our third very, very eminent speaker, Mr. K. Skandan, who has been also an advisor, but more than being an advisor, he's a friend of mine. He and I became very good friends when he was in the MHA and I was the Corps Commander that time. And we found that Mr. Skandan's skills at handling this, understanding this whole job and not being exploited sufficiently by the army. And that's how we got Mr. Skandan to BB Cant for the first seminar there. And thereafter, we found him always with us in everything, holding our hand and supporting us, exactly as he is here today. And one expects a tremendous amount from him because he has the experience. He has the experience more than just the observations. He's the person who can tell us in a few words as to what exactly needs to be done. Over to you, Skandan Saab.
Thank you, General Saab. Thank you, Hasnain. And thank you, Kasa, for inviting me today. I'm very grateful for the kind words of everybody. But I can confess to you that the speakers before me have done a tremendous job in making their presentations. First of all, I do not represent the central government as such, so my views should be taken as more personal. It's not necessarily the views of the central government. One thing is very clear to me as always is that whatever happens in Jammu and Kashmir, constitutionally, the central government has to take one step backward and look at things. Because the main focus of administration is the union territory of the state government. But invariably, the central government is always given the blame and they have to take the blame. They in fact shield all the faults if there are any of the state governments and the union governments, because that is the way the nation looks at all the states. And therefore, it is important for you to understand that the role of the central government is not directly there, but it's always there, because in Kashmir, there's always a situation, as already stated by somebody, which is external and that which is internal. To deal with the external issues, the state government has several ministries and organizations to help it, largely consisting of intelligence agencies and the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of External Affairs, who looks at the geopolitical situation and the impact that may have or likely to have on Kashmir and in the rest of India as well. So the central government has a very, very salutary role to play when it comes to geopolitics and the external environment. But when it comes to the internal security situation or law and order, as this comes under the kind of inverted commas, the law and order situation or security situation, the central government limits itself to offering paramilitary forces to support the state government forces, to offer the help of the army if it is required. And so that is the constitutional position. Now, I also feel that there is a time now, it's time now for the central government to look at the whole issue from what has happened in the past and look at history also. So what is the fault line? The fault line, 1988 clearly, when the Kashmiri Pandits have been thrown out of the valley. Why? Because they were the last visible signs of a multiculture in Kashmir Valley. And therefore, throwing them out was to establish the monoculture. And what was this monoculture in Kashmir? Was openly touted as saying Kashmir Banega Pakistan. In that slogan. Who helped them to achieve up to 1988, 1973 onwards, as Bashir has written in his book? the radicalization had started. The forces of Jamaat-e-Islami infiltrated in the primary schools and they created a radical class. Who were the first to go abroad? 1988, when the militancy occurred, all these youth went and gathered arms, was fed by. Why this? Because again, we have to look at history. It was Zia after 1977 who did the same thing in Pakistan. He tried to bring in a monoculture, removed all moderate elements, gave them power beyond their needs, and actually ruined Pakistan itself. But he also sowed the seeds of this poison into Kashmir. These boys were taught to carry arms and kill people with impunity, kill the soldiers, train them there. So in 1988, when this happened, we probably underestimated them. We had to send the whole set of Kashmiri Pandits ran away. And we probably thought it was temporary, but it took nearly 5-6 years. And that is where the sacrifice of our security forces comes into play, because against all odds at that point in time, decimation of the intelligence agencies, the crackdown of the will of the local police, we have retrieved the situation, but by that time, a lot of things had happened in Kashmir to create that monoculture. This generation of Kashmiri Pandits have not seen the amity of the people. They are a generation who has lived apart from Kashmiris. That is one point. The other point also very well stated by both the speakers before me. You're now looking at Kashmiri Pandit because of the visible targets. But you're not looking at the targets that are less visible but more important in creating and in keeping the mosaic of Kashmir alive. Freedom of all religions and ideologies to be practiced, and that is the killing of moderates within the Islamic society of Kashmir. The peace-loving people were left dumbfounded when many of their leaders were killed. And I don't have to narrate them because the background is well known, the numbers are well known. So now what's new? What's happening? So we went through all this and now we have the union territories. And again, we are finding the same thing that's happening, because in one sense, we can say that this is perhaps like the Lieutenant Governor has said today, the last vestiges. I don't know, because very often we say that. But it's because the resurgence or re-emergence of the Kashmiri Pandit, the multicultural mosaic in the valley, they are thinking of hitting back at the soft targets. And Kashmiri Pandits and moderates are the people who believe most in non-violence. So what are we looking at? We are looking at the same philosophy of trying to make the Kashmiris believe that it is in their interest that they should be a monoculture by a small segment of the people, or perhaps a little more than what I believe is there. So what have we to do? We have, as a central government and the union government, to work together to do one or two things that is very important. One is not conflate terrorism with religion. Please don't do that. It's going to set up anti-government forces, increase the number of people that are anti-government. Second, remove the fears of the Kashmiri people. And that requires, as Bashir said, a lot of empathy, a lot of outreach, and a lot of talking to the Kashmiri people. But remove somehow the feeling that coming back of Kashmiri culture, Kashmiri people or other mainland or the Indian people or the other states people into Kashmir will remove their jobs and remove their land and remove their opportunities. It's wrong. It's a myth. History and civilization has always showed that it's a multiplier force. You expand the markets, you expand the horizon, you expand your mind, you enrich your ideology, you enrich the civilization in which you are in. So it's important to cultivate these sinews and give them strength. Give strength to the moderate forces, peace-loving people. I'm sure, and I've lived in Kashmir and I know that Kashmiri people want peace and order, they want good education, they want opportunities around the world, they want their skills to be known, honed. They want to integrate with everybody. The Kashmiri society has always been a mosaic. They have lived. Today, the polarization is visible because the earlier unity is something which has now come into the mind, imagination only. But in actual practice of these moderate peoples, in their daily lives, we see a lot of love and affection. We see a lot of interaction. We see a lot of trade. But how do you strengthen them? That should be the thinking process, not only of the central government, but of the local administration as well. And I'm sure that this will happen. I'm sitting too far away. I'm sure you'll have to brainstorm and get into ideas on how to do this. People like Bashir and Javed can work it out. You have to, this is no longer possible.
Sir, 1 minute more for you to wind up.
Yes, it's no longer possible today to keep saying that I will be kept on being hit and I'll do nothing about it. That is why you see in the media and other places the surgeons of extreme action contemplated, like attack Pakistan, go and remove theirs. We have to domestically take care of our state. The external forces will not be able to do anything, whether it is Pakistan or Turkestan or Malaysia or anybody. That the central government will take care of through its central agencies and everybody else. But domestic politics, domestic security situation is solely in our hands. With this, I thank the opportunity for doing this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chandan Saab. That was absolutely brilliant. You made some very, very fine points, of course, starting off with the whole idea of monoculturalism, the idea of promoting monoculturalism in the valley, primarily for the reason which I have also been always believing that for Pakistan, it was important to ensure this. Otherwise, Kashmir was far too close to India's secular and very tolerant culture. If you establish monoculturalism, you take away Kashmir from that part of Indian ideology and bring it closer to Pakistan. And the second thing, very correctly identified by you, a myth, the myth that restrictions in inward movement of populace is only going to be to the detriment of the local people, which is not correct. You are absolutely right. But the million-dollar question on which I think we will probably have to have a second seminar is how to do the reach out to the people and convince them. Thank you. I'm sure something will come up on this in the question hour also. Now over to our last speaker, Dr. Tara Kartha. Looking forward to your ideas. 10 to 11 minutes for you too, ma'am.
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of take off from where Mr. Skandan stopped, because I think he's raised a very relevant question, and what the others also talked about in terms of what is the, the narrative has to be changed, because right now it's in a very, very terrible position. I'll give you an example. Just in January, Pakistan sentenced Pastor Zafar Bhatti to death for blasphemy. Okay, he's been in prison for 12 years. Did anybody know about this year? In 2018, the POK government quietly put forward a constitutional amendment which took all the powers and made it virtually independent. Imran Khan came, reversed the whole thing, took away all the powers that it had. Today, you won't find a constitution on the POK website. Does anybody know this year? We have no idea. Imran Khan again came, Gilgit-Baltistan, given some amount of powers by democratic governments. Every time it is a proper democracy, not a selected one, who has given some powers to the Gilgit-Baltistan government, taken away again by the Imran Khan government, taken away, they've got nothing. It is completely and absolutely ruled from Rawalpindi. Now, that is one aspect. The fact that all these things, this blasphemy has become this hot issue here. Did anybody know about this? So there is something seriously wrong with the way we are these outragers. We are very good at outraging, but you don't see all the problems which are there on the other side. Does anybody in Kashmir know this? You're talking right now about elections in Kashmir. You're talking of delimitation. You're talking of whether there should be a state. None of this is available on the other side of Kashmir right now. It was there earlier, but it has since been taken away. Nobody knows this. So that is one aspect. I'm going to do this very quickly. And in fact, something I should mention, Article 370, Pakistan did a 370 way back in 1949 with the Karachi Agreement. They just took away one part of Gilgit-Baltistan and give it away to somewhere else. So anyway, we won't go there. The second part of the narrative, which we really, really need to concentrate on. You saw that Ilhan Omar coming to POK. Who was supporting her? There's a whole group of people, the Stand with Kashmir, then there is ICNA, there is a whole bunch of, what shall we call, so-called NGOs, including many of them backed by the Jamaat-e-Islami. They are a very rich organization. And they are the ones who are peddling this disinformation across. You go anywhere, you take a taxi in the US or in Europe, you talk of Kashmir, everybody knows. Everybody knows. You talk of Gilgit-Baltistan, they'll say, wo kahan par hai? So this is where I'm saying, where is our narrative in all this? There is a huge industry promoting the Kashmir conflict. There are respected universities which give very nicely funded, what shall I say, professorships to write on Kashmir. I mean, I'd like to get one of those, right? But you can't get it unless you write against the Indian government. So that is what you're confronting. This is a whole industry against which you are standing. And what are we doing? We go to the third part. Our narrative in India is what? It's what we call desktop nationalism. We stand here and we outrage about things, forgetting the effect it's going to have on Kashmir. I mean, we have what the first speaker talked about. There's this whole bunch of youth who can be lit by any match. And here you are providing the matches. I mean, let's blame Pakistan for a lot of things, but let's also admit that we are doing some of their job for them by this kind of a narrative. And in terms of, what one of the speakers said is talk about a people-friendly government, which I'm 100% with you. You need governance in Kashmir. You need an administration with works. But the problem is we don't have people-friendly government anywhere. So let's understand what is possible and what is not. I mean, I completely get it that once you do an Article 370, you need to get people, like exactly what you said. Give them the idea, look, we are all out for integration. This is your advantage. This is what we're going to do for you. But the Delhi has never done that. They don't know how to. It's not that there are wicked people here. It's just that those instruments are simply not there. There's bad governance pretty much everywhere. So that is a problem. I'm just coming to that. And I also want to say, in terms of getting your message across, which institutions do we use? If you use them, there is a problem which Delhi has. If you use, for example, the television, you will be accused of trying to control journalism. So you can't, so how do you get this across? You could use a very sophisticated, media campaign, a social media campaign, but that again, perhaps it's been done, but if it is, it's absolutely ineffective. Can you use All India Radio? Yeah, to an extent, because it does have a fantastic reach. We kind of underestimate the reach that All India Radio has. Everybody's got that. People like us sitting with TV, we don't see it, but the rest of the country does. We could use that. You can even, but I think again, another speaker said the Delhi's messaging, I think he emphasized that Delhi's messaging is just orders, giving this and the other things. But I'm not sure. I mean, I would ask Mr. Skandan this. How is this to be done? How does Delhi send? I mean, the PM went there and had this host of projects. You're providing things. You've got people coming in with investments and all that they're doing right. But still what instrument do we use to tell them that, look, this is what we are trying to do for you. Would you like to come on board? I mean, I get the political narrative, but let's also face it. Political actors always have their own motivations, they're not always there to tell you the right thing. So I'm going to just stop there. I'm not going to take my entire 10 minutes. Basically, I'm just taking this, that let's look at this in a practical fashion. There is a huge amount of rubbish being thrown against you, and I don't think you're doing anything to counter it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. You haven't utilized your entire time. I think you've 3 or 4 minutes left. Let me exploit 1 or 2 minutes of yours. You made some very, very good points, no doubt. But let me go back to what Mr. Bashir Asad said. The aspect of, or I think it was Javed who said this aspect about a people-friendly government, an issue which you picked up and said, nowhere in the country do you have people-friendly governments. I tend to agree with you. There aren't. But my only point, in agreement with what both of them perhaps meant, is that when you are in a conflict zone afflicted for the last 30 years, and now you're making amends completely and trying to go into what is called a conflict transformation and conflict resolution, this is the stage when you need to have a special attitude towards the people of that state, of that location, of that area. And there are ways of doing it, let me tell you. The unfortunate thing is, no one is looking at the aspects of communication strategy, which is our biggest weakness. I hope something will come up in the remaining part of the seminar, but this is an issue which we need to get into. In fact, I would say the topic we are discussing is perhaps too generic. Next time we need to discuss this aspect, how to do de-radicalization and how to effectively reach out to the people through our communication strategy. I can tell you, I can quote you many methods. As a part of the empowered group number 8 of the Prime Minister, we are the ones during the COVID, I was a member of this group, who reached out primarily for vaccination to sensitize people because of the threat of vaccine denial. And I can tell you the success of the Information and Broadcasting Ministry was amazing. That was a social issue. Similar social issues can be taken on a mass scale by the Information and Broadcasting Ministry if they wish to do it. Unfortunately, no one in India gives that importance to the INB ministry or to those people who are capable of doing this job. That's just my suggestion to lots of it. We have come to the end of our 4 panelists, very eminent panelists, and very, very good remarks, presentations given by them. We've got a couple of questions. I think I'll follow them sequentially, and I will nominate the person who may wish to address this first. So we've got from Brigadier Deepak Sinha, what do the panelists think would be the effect of AFSPA being removed from the hinterland and kept applicable only along the border? Only along the border, I would presume what Brigadier Sinha means is about 15 to 20 kilometers of the border belt, of the LOC belt. This is the question. 15 kilometers up to the LOC belt, you keep AFSPA, and beyond that in the hinterland, remove it in all 20 districts of Jammu and Kashmir. I think I would like to listen to what Mr. Javed Beg has to say on this, and then Mr. Skandar. If anyone else wishes to come in, we will welcome that too. Javed Beg, all yours.
Sir, I would rather put this question to our security apparatus, which I totally believe in, because removing AFSPA should be a call based on the security, especially the institution of Indian Army. I, as somebody who who is speaking from ground zero, would recommend holistic review of the situation before we go for withdrawal of AFSPA, because we have seen these things happening. It's not over yet. It's not over yet. In
other words, what you are saying, Javed, is that it's not a black and white situation where you just one fine day get up in the morning and remove it. You need to consider this much more deeply. And perhaps there may be areas where you may remove it, and there are areas where you may still wish to keep it. Can we have 30 seconds, 1 minute from Mr. Asad, Bashir Asad? Bashir?
Sir, I think Mr. Asad has dropped out. Maybe his internet is the
Can we have it from Mr. Skandan from a government point of view? Before we come to Dr. Tara Karta?
If I would say, I will say it's not AFSPA per se, but it is the use of AFSPA. how the security agencies operate as per in a particular situation. I agree with what Javed has said, that it has to be the call of the security forces. But more important, I would like, if there are any problems, to look at the SOPs, whether they're being followed, whether the SOPs are okay with the security forces. Can it be diluted a little bit? Are they quite happy at the dilution? And then it has to be a gradual withdrawal. It cannot be like taken off in one shot or put back in one shot, which is what we are doing, which is wrong. I feel there has to be a gradual kind of loosening rather than.
Dr. Tara Kartha, before I come to you on this very important aspect, if I may just offer an opinion, you will have to reenact ASPA if you wish to dilute it in any way. And that is going to be a major challenge, number one. Number two, we have gone through this whole process in 2011 and 12 when I was the Corps Commander, and Skandan Saab himself was in the government in MHA at that time. And we looked at the progressive, this was the proposal given by the government at that time, the Jammu and Kashmir government, to remove AFSPA from 2 districts of Kashmir and 2 districts of Jammu. But we shot it down at that time because we felt that the security situation was not up to it. And a revival would be on the cards if we allowed this to happen. So what about, what is your opinion, Dr. Taraka?
No, I think I'll pass on this question. I think you all are more.
Okay. I think we have answered a lot on this. The general consensus seems to be review it, look at it. Don't think of just removing it overnight. Do it gradually, do it in some districts of the area on an experimental basis. And Mr. Skandan's point about making sure that the application of AFSPA should be correctly executed. The unfortunate thing, Skandan Saab, is that many times things are not under your control. Most mistakes which happen are not deliberate issues. They just happen on the spur of the moment. So this is an awkward thing sometimes in which decisions will have to be taken. Thank you for that question, Brigadier Deepak Sinha. Can I come to Colonel? I can't really understand this. Colonel, is this Colonel Nair? Yeah, it's Colonel Nair. Yeah, that's right. Given the state of play in the collusive approach against India between China and Pakistan, and the recent inclusion of Afghanistan into this calculus after 31st of August last year, is there any involvement of Chinese agencies in keeping the pot boiling in Kashmir? I'm sure Dr. Tara Kartha would love to answer that question. And before we go on to perhaps Mr. Skandan to also look at it. Tara, over to you.
The Chinese position is actually very interesting because on the one hand, they're trying to get Pakistan to, get Gilgit-Baltistan as a province. That's a lot of Chinese persuasion there to tell them that, because, to get the CPEC through, you need a legal framework which is feasible. So you can't do that when the laws and the status of Gilgit-Baltistan is not known. That is actually an advantage to us in some ways. We need to look at that in future. For example, you want to buy a piece of land for a Chinese company, you can't because the land laws are very similar to what is there in J&K. So that is a problem. On the second hand, they do not want a united Kashmir. They don't want that. That is China's worst nightmare. That is the second. However, I think I have seen in several in so-called NGOs, there is a Chinese branch which is fingering this issue in terms of the social media, the talks, the networks. I'll tell you one interesting story. I was speaking in Washington at a university, and I arrived there and I found the hall is completely empty. There's nobody there except the professor who called me. Why? Because the girl who was managing it was a Chinese American. She just didn't send out invitations. So, it was amazing. That is the kind of coordination which Pakistan has with the Chinese. You understand what I'm saying? So there is clearly some kind of a coordination on the ground. They want to keep us, and definitely now with the Ladakh, the thing live, all of you all know there's a whole bunch of, Chinese, these Uyghurs and Tibetans are already there. You don't have to doubt them, but that China would like to keep us bogged down, definitely.
There's a question linked to this, which is later there, but I will just read it out now. And then I'll request Mr. Kandan to also come into it. The question, Dr. Tara, is that there was a news report that Pakistan is thinking of handing over Gilgit-Baltistan to China in return of writing off the loan it cannot repay. How true is it?
No, I don't think so.
I think also that it really doesn't deserve much of an answer, because there is no such inkling which I have ever heard of. Kandan Saab, would you like to come in on this whole issue of the connivance, the collusivity of China and Pakistan?
The political alignment is there. Pakistan is more friendly to China than China is to India on strategic matters. So how they use it is something which you'll have to keep a watch on. It's not direct. I don't see anything direct right now.
General Hasnain, if I can,
go ahead.
that previous question actually has a kernel of truth, because if you remember that original leak from Dawn on the whole China-Pakistan corridor thing, the agriculture, China is very, very badly short of agricultural land. It's some 4%, 5% or something. They have been taking over a lot of land in Gilgit-Baltistan for agriculture purposes. So, I mean, not handing over, but that slowly this would increase, where the large tracts of it is controlled by the Chinese is likely.
The aspects of the dams, the entire water management system of Gilgit-Baltistan, into which the Chinese have been deeply involved. The placement of 11,000 troops right at the beginning, if you remember, in 2010, 11,000 Chinese troops had moved in as a prelude to the overall China-Pakistan economic corridor, which was then not even announced at that time. Okay, we'll move on to the next question. This is a question from Mr. Shrikant Kulkarni. What is the role played nowadays by the Gupkar group? Is it fueling the fire? Let me add to this question. It's not just a question of, we're not discussing just a particular group, etc. What is actually the role of the political domain in the current situation in Kashmir? Right? We are looking at the Gupkar group, no doubt. They have been marginalized to a very great extent. Is there political space available? Because the current run of activities of what is happening, the threats today, can be very largely done away with greater political activity, greater political activism of a positive kind. So, Mr. Javed Beg, would you like to take this issue on, the role of politics in the current environment? And then I'll invite Bashir also to comment on it.
Thank you so much, sir. This is again a very important question. But of late, we have seen PAGD, an amalgam of few regional and sub-regional political parties. They've been, negatively doing their activities. In the times of, difficulties, political parties, as political institutions, they come together and work towards normalizing situation, diffusing tensions, because, these tensions and situations are all but natural. But these political parties as institutions have failed to contribute or play their role in a very positive manner. The way they have been releasing statements are actually adding fuel to the fire. They are actually radicalizing people. I don't want to name, but our honorable ex-CM speaking the language that Muslims in this country are unsafe. Islam is in khatra. Another honorable CM of erstwhile state of J&K saying that hamara rishta mulk ke saath khatam ho gaya. Now, we are being treated as second-class citizens. So this is actually radicalizing the younger generation, because people still have faith in these political parties. I won't say 100% people, but there are some people, and people look up to these institutions as the investment of New Delhi in J&K. But this change in their tone, change in their language, the choice of words, they actually
Javed, can I ask you a question on that?
Sir.
The political space in Jammu and Kashmir is wide open. You have marginalized the Gupkar group, so to say, because they are the old world, and you say yourself that they are working, their utterances, etc., are not adding anything positive to the narratives at the moment. Is there an effort going on to create a different political environment with some more political players? Because that seems to be absent completely at the moment.
Well, General Saab, there is certainly a huge vacuum, which is to be filled. But Kashmiri youth have to take the lead. There was a very good exercise done in the name of DDC elections, wherein I also participated. More than 80% youth participated. Can you believe 80% voter turnout in my district, which of late we have seen for all bad reasons after Rahul Bhai was killed, Amreen, that sister was killed. 80%. And the people who participated in the third tier of panchayat system, DDC elections, were youth, both males and females. That that should have been taken forward. But I am extremely sorry, even that DDC councils have failed Kashmiris. I participated with an intention to contribute to the holy institution of democracy. People contributed. There are good people really contributing.
So there is a political
vacuum.
There is a political vacuum in Kashmir.
There is.
Bashir Saab, would you like to come in and just comment on that political vacuum? If he is not here at all. He's not here at all. Okay, then Javed, go ahead. The political vacuum you were talking about.
Sir, that political vacuum should have been filled soon after, holding of DDC elections, because you actually had a great leadership in the form of elected DDC representatives. You see, you had 4 districts reserved for our females, and they're doing really great. I want to take name of Miss Safina Beg from Baramulla. She been doing tremendous work there. But we couldn't take that good exercise, that good energy of youth forward and fill that vacuum created after 5th August 2019.
Kannan sir, would you like to say something? Can I just come back to you? Kannan
yes,
sir,
sir. Yes, sir.
To say something on this.
Sir, one thing is that we cannot fill political space like sending people across forces or something like that. It's not as simple as that. It's a larger issue because political space is built on certain principles of politics that takes place either locally, state or national. One of the problems that we have is the reach of many of the politicians that I notice in Jammu and Kashmir are very insular and they are very region bound. They are not crossing the threshold to make themselves relevant in areas other than where they have their own particular influence. So how that will emerge is something that what kind of instruments are required to trigger a political value system on which a debate can occur, on which the youth can be attracted to join, is something that is not in my ken, because I am not a politician of that sort.
I will come to Dr. Tara Kartha with a specific issue on this. And we have labored on this issue of politics quite a bit. Let's say hypothetically, you have an election a year and a half later. You have now done delimitation and everything, and you have set up the whole election machinery, and a year and a half later, preceding the national elections, you have elections in Jammu and Kashmir. And you find that one of the elements of the Gupta group itself emerges as the most prominent political party. You will have tomorrow the central government to deal with it. How do you anticipate such a situation where on one hand they are completely poles apart, not willing to look at each other, eyes completely in different directions? How will polity play in Kashmir in this manner? Dr. Tara Kartha.
Well, to be honest, I don't think they are that much against each other as we think. Okay, I can't go beyond. I don't know how to explain that. Their politicians have a way of seguing into a situation which is useful to them. So I have full faith in the ability of those politicians. I'll just go till there.
Thank you. That's a very good point that you are making. In fact, we did see the Prime Minister, for example, giving the invitation in the month of June last year. We haven't heard since then. It happened since June when the invitation came to everyone to come and meet the Prime Minister, etc. I hope there will be more such meetings before the next elections come up. So we'll put an end to this discussion here.
Can
Oh,
I-
yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask Javed that if you don't mind me asking,
Yeah, please go ahead.
that in local government, which is actually the most important thing which we need that so desperately to function. Can you give me 3 points which you find is driving you nuts? This is why local government is not working.
Thank you so much. Well, we missed an opportunity after DDC elections. We should have launched a grand political initiative soon after DDC councils were made. The idea and philosophy behind DDC councils was great, but we missed on an opportunity. Second most important thing, youth. We keep talking about youth empowerment in this part of our country, but on ground, you won't see youth being empowered. No, that is a big no. Third, I must congratulate and salute the institution of Indian Army. There is a new phenomena. People in Kashmir say we believe Indian Army more than JK Police. And this is not going well with the institution of JK Police. People have started getting more closer to the institution of Indian Army. Let Indian Army get little more role in engaging public, especially youth of J&K, because the way Indian Army have been investing in, through Sadbhavana mission in education, skill development, and other activities is so encouraging and healthy for a place like J&K, wherein you have abundance of talent. And one last thing I must say, in this August intellectual gathering, Gufkar, this party is no doubt powerful, yet irrelevant, and an entity people not looking up to. Second, Gufkar has lost its relevance because they have nothing to sell now, apart from releasing statements of communal hatred, dividing people in the name of religion, sects, and creating something out of molehill. Third most important thing, a grand political initiative should be launched in J&K, where
you've gone, yeah. You're mute. Javed, you go on mute. I think your image is also turned around. Just yeah. No, put your image correct.
Okay.
Your image is turned. Yeah. You're back. Okay.
People belonging to different sects, different ethnicities should be also considered. I'm sorry to say, New Delhi has always failed in pursuing these, regional political parties, which have always changed their colors after they were out of power. People of my generation, they understand this. That's why I said these political parties, regional political parties, have become irrelevant, though they claim to be powerful. New Delhi has to understand that every section of Jammu and Kashmir, especially Kashmir society, is important. They should be given their due place, respect, honor, and political role. Thank you so much.
If I may just take on from there, Tara, the importance of new politics in Jammu and Kashmir, that can't be overplayed. The importance of new politics, somehow we have failed to bring an imagination to this. We are still living with the world of Gupkar, the Gupkar party, and therefore that is why I'm saying that don't write off the Gupkar parties. Because if you fail to create new entities, bring in more enthusiasm into the ranks of the people for new entities, you are going to find a return of the old. And that is my fear, that if the return of the old takes place, how are you going to deal with them exactly? That is the major challenge. I've got one or two more questions, interesting ones. Which
Sorry,
I want.
General, can I just interrupt? There are
Yeah.
few that actually already got answered, the top 4 in the Q&A, by 2 anonymous and 1 by Ravi Bhatia and Satyadesh. I think all those got answered just now. But maybe you want to jump to General Rohit Gupta's question.
Oh, I haven't seen this question. And one second.
In
But
the
there's a very important
Sorry.
question before that. which has been asked about Jamaat-e-Islami. Mr. Atmanch Bhatt has asked this question, and therefore I want to ask this question from Javed, right? It says the Jamaat-e-Islami has been banned, and yet the ideology flourishes. You spoke a lot about radical Islam, and we are seeing the Jamaat-e-Islami has been banned. Why is it so difficult to combat this ideology? You spoke about a lot about the role of radical Islam, political Islam, the ideologies of all these beliefs, but you didn't speak at all about how we can do it and what we are doing about it. Take a minute and a half to do it because we got some other important questions. Go ahead.
Sir, you cannot kill an ideology, but you can counter an ideology with another ideology. Jamaat-e-Islami ideology is intolerant. It is an extremist ideology. You can only counter this with the same old Rishism, Sufism, which is the ethos of Kashmiri culture, and that ideology is Sufism. You can actually counter this ideology with strengthening and educating that ideology, which my generation does not even know. People of my generation, they don't even subscribe to that Rishism, Sufism. That's an order. The Sufism of rest of our country is different from the Sufism of Kashmir. In Kashmir, our Sufism is based on Rishism. Mata Laleshwari, people are still agreeing to Mata Laleshwari, Laldad. We can have many disagreements, religious, ideological, philosophical, but that's where Kashmiri people are still connected. Not even Jamaat has anything against Mata Laleshwari. It's an example, a beautiful example. So similarly, if we want to counter that ideology, it is banned. The Jamaat-e-Islami is banned, but that ideology is not banned. And they have a very good investment of last 30 years in the system. I can even count on the fingertips the people in the system. They are they are part and parcel of the system, and their investment is now reaping the fruits. When that system discourages people like me, pro-nationalist voices like me, or many likes me. So we have to understand this, that ideology can only be countered by an ideology of tolerance, that is Rishism and Sufism. Thank you.
Sir,
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to come to Mr. Skandan because there are some questions which have just come in the last couple of minutes. There are two questions by General P.R. Kumar, our former DGMO. I'll read both the questions out so that then first we come to Mr. Skandan and then we go to Dr. Tarak Kata. The question is, a government in good faith living in its own silo. The ground-based government and the semi-government linked executive who is arrogant. This is the issue which was raised by Javed, I think also, who is arrogant and not sensitized to local aspirations appears a common perspective. I'm particularly drawing attention to this context because there's a lot of talk about imported bureaucrats into the government of Jammu and Kashmir. People who are not in touch with ground. A lot of complaints against the old world bureaucrats who apparently have been relieved. A lot of new people have come in. I particularly asked Mr. Skandan to answer this question, but there is a second question linked to this. The way forward is still one of tolerance, respect, good governance, employment, a flood of workable projects, raising the quality of life, perception management for mainstreaming Kashmir in a focused, time-bound manner. Accountability of the actors is the answer. It is a long-term project requiring patience and tolerance. Okay, this is a statement or not really a question. But I'll come back to the whole issue about the arrogance of the government servant. Do you think Kashmir, being a conflict zone, stricken over the last 30 years, psychologically affected people need to be handled differently? Mr. Skandan.
Sir, an old saying of Plato, either philosophers should be kings or kings should become philosophers. Remember, those who studied political science. Now, I would say that Tamil Nadu government is a good example because it sensitized the bureaucracy to become empathetic to the people. By a whole series of mechanisms, which started with what is known as the grievance day, a compulsory grievance day, which had all the departments and the district collector and the others at the ground level looking into the grievances of the people and trying to resolve them, and many of them would get resolved, some would take more time, etc. But over 20-30 years since the DMK rule established this has become a very, very genuine methodology of empathy shown towards the people by the government. But government servants cannot replace, and I insist this, I'm telling this with full force of authority that I have, they cannot replace the politician. As Mr. Javed said, we need elections, we need good politicians on the ground, and we need to empower them. Unless you empower today good administrations or those administrations which respect the civil society, which respect the politician, and which sincerely look into the grievances of the people, however small they are. Therefore, whatever you might do to make bureaucracy accountable and empathetic, after all, they are only designed to implement the rule of law. They are not instruments of empathy. They can be made up to some extent, but the instruments of democratization, democratic tradition has to be embedded in the civil society only by way of representative people. This has to be underlined so that whatever manner you do the elections, you at least have a representative who should empower to question people in authority. So that is the essence of democracy.
Thank you very much, Kandan Saab. In fact, you reinforce exactly what most of us have been saying here. The role of the politician, the role of politics. You can't replace the politician, particularly in a conflict zone, in a conflict situation such as this, you can't replace it. And this is our failing at the moment. You see, alternative politics is not being created in Kashmir. We are happy with trying to bring about development without bringing in anything changes in terms of the political culture. I've got a last statement here from General Patankar. It's a statement, not really a question, and it's a suggestion. I'll just read it out. For those who may not remember, General Patankar is perhaps the most respected former Corps commander of Srinagar. Right? I learned the mechanics of commanding a corps from him. Right? So I dare say his thought always got to be respected. He says, thank you for straightforward and focused views expressed by the speakers. I completely agree that a counter narrative is required, and more importantly, for it to reach the people. How can that be done? We have been emphasizing on this. We know the problem, how the problem has to be resolved, how to reach out to the people. How can this be done? What should be its main thrust? Could CASA, our group, CASA, produce a basic framework of such a narrative, and then through dialogue with knowledgeable persons like the present panel, bring it out in the public domain to spread awareness and debate? So thank you so much for this suggestion. This may be the trigger for CASA to go beyond just seminars and the blog, so to say, on WhatsApp as such, to go beyond, because this could be the beginning of the production of very, very short briefs, which can be the result of a seminar and subsequently thrown back for feedback to the panelists, to the people on the ground, refined and put out into public space. Nothing controversial, put out into public space for taking back further feedback or perhaps assisting the government to further its agenda. That's very well taken, General Patankar sir. Now, I have come to the end because our time has exceeded. I've come to the end. I only have to thank my fellow panelists with me today. They've been outstanding, absolutely. Particularly the Q&A session has been very, very good. Thank you so much. Over to you, Mr. Mahadev.
May I take that on, Maddie? Firstly, General Patankar sir, thank you very much for your suggestion. And we shall be making a summary at the end of this. We shall have a discussion in our core committee as to how to take these suggestions forward, and we shall certainly post it on CASA about the way forward. Thank you, sir. All that remains now for me is to thank the eminent panelists, Mr. Bashir Asad, who we lost, I think, due to communication problems, who spoke wonderfully well, Mr. Javed Beg, who opened his heart out to us, Mr. Skandan, with all his experience, came out with some very important observations, which would help us sort of understand the issue further. Dr. Tara Katha, as usual, absolutely outstanding. And above all, our moderator, General Atta, sir, my dear senior colleague and a very good friend, sir, your knowledge on this issue and has been tremendous, and you've really been able to get the best out of the panelists and the question answer sessions that you handled so very well, sir. Thank you so very much. I thank my core committee members, especially Mr. Mahadevan Shankar, for this webinar, for helping me out. Technical support, Ms. Barnali Singha Roy, and dear participants, thank you all very much for sparing a valuable time on a Sunday evening to be with us here. Thank you all, and we wish Kashmir and India a much brighter future. We deserve much better, and we hope that we all work towards a better and a more peaceful Jammu and Kashmir. Thank you all very much. Thank you, sir.